Pop-up headlights. Snap oversteer. Baby Ferrari. These are all likely things that go through your head when you think about the Toyota MR2. And while they are applicable to the AW11, I think the car has much more to offer. Now, I already made a video about the 5 things that I love and hate about my SW20 MR2, and when I was writing this video, I was really afraid that I was going to touch on a lot of the same points. Pop-up headlights, for example, I touched on in that video, and I could very easily bring them up in this video, but if you want to hear my opinions on those, I'll put the link to that video somewhere around right here, and if I can't figure that out, I'll put it down in the description. But what I ended up finding was, besides pop-up headlights, the placement of the engine, and the name of the car, they really don't have that much in common. In my opinion, the AW11 is the pure driving experience. It doesn't feel encumbered by the need to make a ton of power, to make you comfortable, to make you feel special, and for me, that's actually the reason why it manages to make you feel so special. I'll try to explain a bit, but keep in mind that all these points that I'm going to list, all 10 of them, are all going to be pretty specific to my car. I'm talking about my specific AW11, and while they may be relevant to your car or the car that you're looking at buying, most of them probably won't. I'm going to start with some positivity, so let's look at the pros. So the first pro is definitely the steering feel. This car has a manual steering rack, and that's exactly the way that it should be. The front end is extremely light, extremely responsive, and you get a lot of feel back through that steering wheel. You know exactly what that car is going to do. A lot of people call the AW11 probably the closest thing to a go-kart you'll ever drive on the road. Street legal go-kart is a pretty commonly used phrase for AW11s. Even trying to park it with manual steering, you'd expect it to be kind of difficult, but it's a lot easier than you'd think because it has an extremely short wheelbase and it's a really tiny car, and most parking spaces now are made for big trucks and SUVs and that sort of thing. So parking the AW11 is kind of similar to taking a turn on a narrow road. It's really easy. The second pro for my AW11 MR2 is very specific to my own car. I shouldn't even really put this in here, but it is something that I personally love about my MR2, and that is that it has a full frame-up rebuild with the supercharger swap and everything else that was done to it. I covered the history a bit more in depth on this car in a separate video, and again, I'll put that here or down in the description wherever I can figure out. But basically, for the context of this video, the car was completely stripped down to the bare metal, and everything was replaced. Suspension was replaced. Bushings were replaced. All new supercharger bits. Everything. Entire car was redone. That's pretty much the basis of it, and that is my favorite part of the MR2. Probably should have been number 1, but just the way I wrote this list. The third pro for my AW11 is actually the sound of it. Now, most people don't love the sound of the little 4AGEs, or the 4AGZEs in this case, and most exhaust setups on these engines are absolutely atrocious. When I got my AW11, there was actually just a small hole in the muffler, and what that ended up turning into was me getting an entirely custom fabricated piece in order to replace that muffler, and it has a kind of deep throaty noise that you don't expect from a little 1.6, but it's also not very loud. So on cold starts, it has this really nice like gurgle to it, and I think it's just one of the best sounding 4-cylinders that I've ever heard. Sounds much better than my SW20. That car is, I believe, running a completely stock exhaust, and I just love the way that the AW11 sounds in comparison. The fourth pro on this list, and if you watched any of my other videos, specifically my other video on the AW11, you've heard me talk about it, is that this car doesn't have any friggin' T-tops. It has a sunroof, which I'm not super stoked about, but I'm way more stoked about it than if it were to have T-tops. They leak, they make noise while you're driving, they affect the overall rigidity of the car, and they're just overall not great to have. If you love the aesthetic of them, then go ahead, but it's completely a personal preference. I guess there's no right or wrong, because on one side you have the logical hey, they're terrible, and on the other side you have the, I really want to take the roof off and drive around on sunny days. We don't have that many sunny days around here, so I don't really care for that. I have a Jeep which kind of has like a faux T-top design to it, and while it is considerably better, it's a much newer design and it works, it doesn't really leak, I still don't like it, and I don't take them off very often, so I don't see a point in having them in the first place. If there was a solid top for a Jeep, I'd absolutely buy it. There are some cars designed around T-tops, but you can really tell when they're not. Whether it's the SW20 with the T-tops, whether it's the AW11 with the T-tops, or the Toyota Supra with the Targa top, when those pieces are taken out, those cars just look awkward. It completely undermines all of the designer's intentions and direction, and I know what everybody's going to ask me. The answer is yes, I am willing to die on this hill. With that being said, I'm going to get into the fifth and final pro of the AW11, and it's the 80s styling. I'm going to get a little bit away from the T-tops and into the actual exterior styling of these cars, like I said, that the designers were actually going for. I usually don't care about the aesthetics of the outside of any car that I drive. To me, it's one of the less important factors compared to having, a well put together, well designed interior that helps you focus and be more immersed in driving that particular car. But there's something about the 80s boxy boy pop-up headlight styling of pretty much every 80s Japanese car that I love. The A70 Supra, the AW11, the A86, wow, a lot of A's. The old GZ20 Soarers are my absolute favorite, and they don't have pop-up headlights, but, they still fit in the criteria. Just the absolute level of ridiculousness in styling is so specific to that generation of cars. Whether it was like the poster cars that you see, like, the Ferrari Testarossa, the F40, the Lamborghini Countach, like they all had that like wedge or box style with the pop-up headlights, and it's just a style that you can recognize immediately, and I love it. So that's a big pro for me, I guess. That is all 5 of them now, and before I get into the cons of the AW11 MR2, I want to take just kind of like a brief intermission in between to talk about something that I don't think is either a pro or a con, and I'll get a little bit into that. So what am I going to talk about? I think we already know what I'm going to talk about. Snap oversteer. It wouldn't be an MR2 video without talking about it, but snap oversteer, like a lot of things with the MR2, is something you're going to have to get over really quickly when you first buy it. Whether it's taking into consideration the engine placement while driving the car, or taking into consideration the fact that there's literally nowhere to get your hands in the engine bay in order to work on it, you're going to have to get used to a lot of things with the MR2 when you first buy it. It's not a great first car if you've never worked on something before, or you've never driven something that has different driving dynamics. It's a new experience, and if you're using it as your first experience, it may or may not work out for you. But if you understand how to drive these things, if you take the time to learn how to drive it, so even if it is your first car, you do buy it as, your first project. First of all, I wish you luck. They are a little bit more finicky, a little bit more difficult, but they're definitely not impossible. It was my first, like I said, manual car. Right-hand drive car was my SW20, and my second one was an AW11, so I kind of threw myself into the deep end. But if it is your first car, then take the time to learn it. Specifically, take the time to learn how to drive it. Understand that it takes throttle to get out of a skid. The front end lifts like a bat out of hell on acceleration, way more than in your mom's Honda Civic. And if you understand those things and you can grasp them, I think snap oversteer is like the least of your issues. Now, obviously, I couldn't put this in either the pros or the cons list, but I actually tend to take snap oversteer and put it a little bit towards the pros a bit more. And I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, a car that, is known for its tendency to spin out, but keep in mind that people talking online about all this, all the memes, all the trash that everybody spews, that comes down to the car price staying relatively low. And keep in mind, relative is the key term here, because they're still expensive cars. And a big reason why they're still expensive cars is because you have the other half of the population with either too much money or too much space between their ears, going on these importer sites or importer Instagram or whatever, who mark up their prices, 30%, and they talk about how great of a deal it is, when in reality, most people are getting ripped off by these people. I just finished importing a car, and I know the costs involved with it, and I'm going to get into that. That'll be another video coming, but let's just say I really have not a whole lot of time for these car importer sites anymore. They're a bit ridiculous. So that video is coming, but I think it's time that we get into the 5 cons of the AW11 MR2. And one thing that I noticed when I was writing out this list is how hilariously similar all of the cons really are. They all kind of come back to just one idea that is pretty simple. And I'll just give you all 5 cons really, really quick, and you'd be able to decipher it from this. It's an 80s Toyota, 80s Toyota, 80s Toyota, it's an 80s Toyota, and it's Toyota from the 80s. So what do I mean by that? Obviously, I'm going to go more in-depth into these. So, con number 1, it's an 80s Toyota. Like I said, it has low power, it's supercharged, it's a 1.6 liter, it only makes about 140, 145 horsepower in its day, and it's somehow still bad on gas? Con number 2, it's an 80s Toyota. No matter how good the car is, there's going to be interior bits, and there's going to be lots of other plastic pieces, stuff that breaks, that are going to rattle around, they're going to shake, they're going to make a ton of noise, and they're going to be really annoying while you're driving the car. The issue with this is even if you replace it with brand new parts, usually you're replacing it with brand new, more plastic bits and other stuff that are 1980s Toyota. Luckily, I haven't had to deal with this too much. Hasn't been too much of a problem. The only thing right now is actually an aftermarket cup holder that was installed on the dash that is cracked a little. It's old. It's only partially attached, and it likes to rattle around. Con number 3, it's an 80s Toyota. It's going to be hard to find parts for, like I just talked about. If you get a part for an AW11, it's likely going to be either used, might be more than likely used from a high mileage or rusty AW11 that somebody had left in their backyard and now they're parting it out. So the parts that you're going to get are going to be kind of trash, but there are some good forums, there are some good Facebook groups, there's a great community. The issue comes with a lot of people within that community that love to hoard their parts or sell them for way too much money. And that's a pretty usual thing. Try your best to avoid that, but again, it's an 80s Toyota. Con number 4, you're always afraid that it's going to rust no matter how irrational that is. So my AW11 has no rust. It's been completely rust-proof, rust-coated, everything is repainted. I really have no reason to be concerned over it, but no matter who you talk to, they always say something along the lines of, Japanese cars aren't built for North America. They're not built for the salt. And in the back of your mind, that will just fester over time, and you'll just be constantly scared that you're going to walk out one day and your car is just going to be a pile of rust, which, again, it's completely irrational, but buy one and tell me that this doesn't happen. And finally, con number 5, it is an 80s Toyota. And this was going to break a lot of hearts, and a lot of people aren't going to agree with me. But outside of the car community, nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares about your little 1988 Toyota MR2. My MR2 is bright blue, Daytona blue. To me, it looks phenomenal. I absolutely love it. It photographs well, pop-up headlights. It has everything that I want. But then you drive it down the road to a gas station, to a parking lot. You can park the thing, you can walk away, and nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares about that car. And if you're the type of person that is buying, any sort of import, any sort of, nice car for people to say, hey man, nice car, the AW11 is probably not the one you're going to want. Granted, there are people who I have had say, that's a nice looking car, that sort of thing. But usually not to the same extreme that they said something about the SW20. The SW20, bright red, looks weird, it's right-hand drive. There's a lot more people that are willing to comment on something like that. The AW11 to most people looks like a, rusty shitbox from the 80s. Even though it's not rusty, it's not a shitbox, it is from the 80s. And that's it. At the end of the day, it's a 1980s Toyota sports car, and you get exactly what you're asking for when you buy one. It's reliable, it's fun, and it demands respect when you own and you drive it. If you have any stories about your AW11 or any other car that you'd like to share, you'd like for me to cover, hopefully when COVID all settles down, I can actually get out and review, talk about, interview some people about their own cars. But for now, I'm stuck in here making videos about my own cars, talking about them, getting to know you guys in the comments. So feel free to leave a comment. Follow me on Instagram at Bayshore Boys, and you can send me a message there, tell me all about your car. I've been trying to make a video every week, and last week I kind of messed that one up. My schedule's been crazy. I still work full time, but hopefully I'll now get back on some sort of schedule where I can make a video a week, maybe a video every 2 weeks. I'm not quite sure right now, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Like I said, feel free to leave a comment about your own car. Send me a DM on Instagram at Bayshore Boys. I'll put that right here. And like, share, subscribe. Thanks. My name is Nick, and I'm the founder of Bayshore Boys, and I'm an automotive enthusiast from Newfoundland, Canada, currently living in New Brunswick, Canada, and I mostly love old Toyotas, but every now and again catch me with something else. I'm going to announce a new car very soon on the channel. It is going to be a Toyota. Leave me a comment, let me know what you think the new car is, and I'll let you know. If you're right, I'll pin your comment at the top. Alright, hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thanks. Have a good one.